Gimjang refers to making kimchi to get through the winter. How much will gimjang cost this year? We will visit the consumer market revitalized as the season of gimjang kicks off. From gold cabbages to anti-cancer cabbages, Korean cabbages are newly created with added functions. What is the core principle of Microspore culture technology that enabled this? Korea's economy enters a low-growth trend. Will it imitate Japan's 2 lost decades? We will discuss the possibility of deflation and ways to overcome this. Dense forests and trees are assets of the world. Korea has introduced ICTs that protect forests from fire and damage. What does its activities include? North Korea has sent Choi Ryong-hae as its special envoy to Russia to beef up its alliance with Moscow. What is behind this, and how will the relations between North Korea and Russia change?
Hello and welcome to Bizline. I'm Kurt Asian. I'll be hosting the program during this 2-week period that Andrew Salmon is away. We're coming to you this week from the Ewha Women's University Museum. It's full of art, calligraphy, and textiles from hundreds of years of Korean history. It's well worth a stop through if you're ever visiting Korea. In fact, if you're ever visiting Korea, you'll tend to hear a phrase repeated from locals over and over. Koreans seem to be very proud of the fact that it is a country of 4 distinct seasons. There's a very hot summer, there's a very cold winter, and there's a beautiful fall and spring in between. Well, we're getting ready to go into the very cold part of the year, and it's a time that Koreans have historically used to make their kimchi supply for the entire winter. There's a name for it, gimjang. And it's also a time of the year when all of the ingredient inputs into kimchi spike in terms of the consumer demand. Economists use this period of time to study how markets behave in terms of all of these food ingredients. So for our first story on Bizline this week, a look at Korea's gimjang economy.
Making large quantities of kimchi to prepare for the winter is a unique custom that can only be seen in Korea. As the cold weather has arrived earlier this year, more and more households are trying to make and store large amounts of kimchi. November and December are known as gimjang, or kimchi-making season in Korea. Amid the gimjang season, consumption of kimchi-related products is on the rise, boosting the retail industry. We visited a local mart, one of the busiest places now as the gimjang season has kicked off full scale. This mart is selling main ingredients of gimjang, including Napa cabbages and radishes, as well as dozens of minor ingredients such as salted seafood and vegetables for seasoning at a discount, stimulating consumption by housewives. Thanks to favorable weather conditions this year, vegetable output has increased, but their prices have fallen. This has led to increased number of households doing gimjang themselves and more housewives visiting markets to shop.
좀 식구가 있어요. 그래서 담아서 딸도 주고 또 데리고 있는 가족들이 있어가지고 조금 더 많이 예산을 해요.
40포기 정도 담글 거고요. 작년보다 올해 배추값이 좀 더 싼 것 같아서 좀 많이 담그더라고요.
Moreover, this mart has set up more sales stands to gather all the ingredients for making kimchi in one place. This is boosting its sales.
고객분들께서는 이제 1년 먹을 김치를 한꺼번에 사다 보니까 비용적인 부담도 있으실 텐데요. 아무래도 채소값이 떨어지면 비용 부담이 적어서 많이 좋다고 하시고요. 또 작황이 올해 같은 경우 좋기 때문에 많이 만족하고 계십니다.
When comparing 15 items, including Napa cabbages and other kimchi ingredients, the cost of gimjang for a 4-person family fell 6.4% to approximately $190 in a traditional Korean market and declined 8.6% to roughly $230 in a hypermarket. Gimjang-related products that enable consumers to reduce time and make it easier for them to make kimchi are also gaining popularity. Retailers are competitively launching salted Napa cabbages as their demand has spiked in the gimjang season. They are gaining strong popularity. According to this year's Food Distribution Almanac, salted Napa Cabbage market totaled $1.3 billion in 2013, exceeding sales of kimchi for the first time. As Korean people's housing types has changed to collective housing like apartments, it has become difficult for them to buy, prepare, and salt cabbages at home. As a result, salted cabbages have become quite popular. By making kimchi at home, people feel they can eat more hygienic kimchi more suited to their taste. Our Home is selling salted Napa cabbages and seasonings for gimjang at a discount. It is gaining a favorable response by emphasizing an easier way to do gimjang with a motto of "Let's allow moms to get rest."
저희 절임 배추 같은 경우에는 그 염수에서 20시간 이상 절임을 하고요. 그다음에 2번 선별하고 3번 세척을 하기 때문에 따로 별도로 세척하시거나 골라내실 필요 없이 바로 사용이 가능하십니다. 그리고 양념하고 같이 있는 키트 같은 경우에는 그 절임 배추에 알맞은 그 양념의 양을 저희가 미리 계량을 해서 제공을 하게 됩니다. 그래서 따로 계량을 하시거나 하실 필요 없이 바로 버무리시면 되는 간편한 제품입니다.
In addition, it is selling freshly made gimjang kimchi for those who cannot make kimchi themselves. This is also quite popular.
네, 맞벌이 부부다 보니까 집에서 직접 김장을 해 먹기가 굉장히 힘들거든요. 그래서 이렇게 간편하게 먹을 수 있는 김치들을 직접 구매해가지고 겨울철에도 김장 대신에 먹고 있습니다.
Along with the increasing number of people making their own kimchi at home, those who simply buy kimchi from stores are also on the rise. Now, the kimchi market touts a size too big for other food markets to chase. As a result, conglomerates as well as smaller firms are jumping into the market with their own characteristics and winning moves.
전체 시장은 한 2조 정도 보고 있고요. 그중에 이제 가정에서 소비하는 가정용 제품 시장을 3천억 정도로 보고 있습니다. 상대적으로 업소용보다는 굉장히 적은 수치지만 3천억이라고 하면 단일 카테고리에서 굉장히 큰 그 매출액이거든요. 크게 성장률을 기대하기보다는 다양한 제품을 이제 저희가 제안을 해서 새로운 시장을 창출하는 게 중요하다고 생각하고 있습니다. 그 일환의 그 노력의 일환으로 이제 저염김치라는 카테고리를 새로 창출을 하려고 노력하고 있고요. 파이 자체를 좀 넓혀 보려고 저희는 계획 중에 있습니다.
Kimchi refrigerators also benefit from the gimjang season. Major home appliance firms have launched special large-scale bargain sales and boosted their product lineups amid increasing number of households which make kimchi themselves.
김장 재료 가격도 싸지고 신모델도 나와서 판매량이 계속 증가하고 있습니다.
As a result, the industry forecasts the kimchi refrigerator market to rise to about 1.1 million units this year. Kimchi refrigerators are benefiting from the gimjang season when sales of kimchi-related products surge. From kimchi ingredients to more expanded retail industry, if the industry continues to launch various marketing and develop products, kimchi will become a large driving force of Korea's economy.
김장으로 인해서 파생되는 가장 큰 효과가 아무래도 이제 김치 냉장고라든지 이런 새로운 상품, 이제 소비자들이 그전에는 생각지 못했던 새로운 상품이 나오고 그로 인해서 새로운 시장이 만들어졌다는 것 자체가 큰 이제 파급 효과를 가졌을 텐데요. 지금 현재는 이제 어느 정도 그 김치 냉장고의 보급률도 많이 올라온 상태여서 이제 추가적인 것을 하기 위해서는 새로운 김치 상품이라든지 이런 쪽으로 연구가 더 필요하고 새로운 상품이 만들어지는 그런 부분의 노력이 있어야 될 것 같습니다.
Kimchi, a staple Korean traditional food, has emerged as a huge industry now. We hope gimjang season can bring more than just a short-term revival of consumption.
Well, by now you know, if you didn't before, that the main ingredient in kimchi is cabbage. But cabbages are not all the same, and they've gone through some changes in recent years. Nowadays you have miniature cabbages, you have cabbages that are yellow or gold instead of white in color. You even have some cabbages that are reported to have anti-cancer properties. And that's all due to science, a specific science really, known as Microspore culture technology. For our next story on Bizline, we're going to take a look at how science is making a better cabbage and a better kimchi.
As the frontiers in the agriculture market break down, the farming industry around the world is in a race to develop new cultivation technology and species to compete in quality against cheaper foreign imports. Microspore culture is under the spotlight for improved taste and function of various vegetable species. Korean agriculture scientists have applied the technology to develop novel Napa cabbage types. An exposition on the Napa cabbage has been sponsored by the Rural Development Administration's National Institute of Horticulture and Herbal Science. Among the exhibits were 12 types of functional Napa cabbages with diverse features. This cabbage has been customized to attract Chinese people who have particularity for the color gold. The color inside is bright orange.
저희가 12종류의 배추를 개발을 했지만 그중에 요즘 가장 관심을 받고 있는 게 그 황금 배추라고 말씀을 하시는 속잎 색깔이 좀 진한 배추입니다. 이 배추는 일반 그 속잎 색깔이 좀 노란 배추보다 약간 더 진해서 귤색 가까운데요. 겉잎색도 진하고 선명하고 맛도 좋고 크기도 크지 않아서 수출용으로도 상당히 두각을 나타낼 그럴 재료입니다.
This Napa cabbage is about 15% smaller than the usual cabbage Koreans use to make kimchi. This could be optimal for kimchi making for singles or a family of two. This Napa cabbage does not look any different from the normal cabbage Koreans are familiar with, but it is enhanced with anti-cancer substances of up to 6 times more than a typical cabbage can offer.
이 품종은 원래 뿌리옥병이라는 병에 강한 그런 특성이 있는데 항암 성분이 글루코시놀레이트가 일반 배추보다 7배 정도 많은 것으로 나타났습니다.
These functionalities are enhanced through microspore cultivation techniques. Insulated microspore culture is a technique using the spores that develop into pollen grains. They are isolated and regenerated into a complete form in vitro embryogenesis process. The new breeds undergo a different breeding process because they are grown and developed for higher and differentiated functions from the embryo stage.
전통적으로 하고 있는 교배라는 방법이 있는데요. 이 방법은 꽃가루를 주두에 이렇게 묻혀서 종자를 맺는 방법인데 8번 정도 교배를 해야 우리가 시판 품종, 그러니까 일반적인 품종을 만들 때 사용할 수 있는 재료로 쓸 수 있는 가치가 있습니다. 그런데 배양을 하게 되면 딱 한 번만 배양에 성공하더라도 저희가 유전적으로 완벽하게 고정된 좋은 재료를 만들 수 있기 때문에 이게 가장 큰 장점입니다.
The culturing takes place with grounding of unmatured blossom and isolation of spores. The microspores are then placed in a medium to artificially make a seed. Once grown into a whole plant that can produce its own seed, an entirely new breed can be regenerated. The culturing period is simple and most of all shortens the breeding process. Scientists have developed the new types in just 2 years compared with 10 years in the past. The administration also applied to the same technology to breed not only Napa cabbage but also white radish.
소포자 배양을 하게 되면 한 1, 2년 만에 순계를 만들 수 있는 장점이 있습니다. 그래서 10년 걸릴 거를 1, 2년에 하니까 비용이 10억이나 20억 들 게 한 1, 2억 만에 한 개 순계를 만들 수 있기 때문에 굉장히 신품종을 개발하는데 상당히 시간이 절약이 되면서 동시에 비용도 절약이 된다고 말할 수 있겠습니다.
It will take about 5 years for the new line of Napa cabbages to hit the market and reach our dinner tables. Once mass propagated, the new breeding method will likely lessen farmers' vulnerabilities to climate changes and help to stabilize their income. The new breed will also pave the way for exports and raise competitiveness for Korean-grown kimchi materials.
중국 사람들이 그 한국 배추 품종 굉장히 좋아합니다. 정말 배추가 맛이 좋고요. 또 김치의 기능성이 알려지면서 저 태평양 건너 미국에 있는 분들도 우리나라 특히 한국 배추 품종에 관심이 많습니다. 그래서 이분들의 그 관심을 더 끌 수 있는 정말 고기능성 품종이 나온다면 저희가 중국뿐만 아니라 미국까지도 종자 수출을 획기적으로 증진시킬 수 있는 기회가 될 수 있을 거라고 저희가 기대를 합니다.
The global seed trade grows 5.2% on average a year and is expected to reach $165 billion by the year 2020. The simpler and faster Microspore culture technology to develop a new vegetable line is expected to make a splash in the burgeoning world seed market.
특히 이 육종에 있어서 신품종을 개발할 수 있는 기간을 단축하는 것은 소포자 배양뿐만이 아니라 이 유전자 검사를 하는 분자 육종 기술과 함께 소포자 배양 기법이 미래의 육종 기술로 전 세계적으로 많이 활용이 되고 있습니다. 그래서 우리나라도 앞으로 이런 분야에서 지속적으로 무배추에서 경쟁력이 있기 때문에 다른 작물로 확대를 해 나간다면 우리나라 종자의 품종 개발의 경쟁력이 확보가 될 것으로 생각을 합니다.
The agriculture industry, which has been snubbed as a bygone sector, is newly focused as a highly valued area for promising growth in the future. The innovative breeding technology and breeds may revitalize our farming industry with global competitiveness.
Economists tend not to agree on much with each other. In fact, they say if you put 3 economists in a room together, you'll end up with 4 different opinions. But one thing they do tend to agree on generally is that deflation is a much more difficult policy challenge than inflation. And these days, there are early indications that perhaps Korea may be tiptoeing down the path of deflation. It's a real challenge for South Korean economists and policymakers. We're going to try to untangle it a little bit now on Bizline with the help of a very special guest, Professor Chae Byung-il of the Ewha Women's University Graduate School of International Studies. Professor Chae, thank you so much for being with us today on Bizline.
My pleasure.
Professor Chae, I should also point out you're the former president of the Korea Economic Research Institute. You have a few things to say, I'm sure, about the macroeconomy. So we have these early indications, maybe, that Korea could enter deflation. Is that your view, and what do we do about it?
In mainly 2 aspects. Number 1, demography. Second, labor market. When you take Korea's what is happening into Japan and adding 20 years in Japan's time frame, precisely the remarkable similar thing is happening. Number 1, demography. Japan was a fast aging society. So by the time 1970, they entered into aging process, and before turn of century, they were heading toward the most aging population in the world. And Korea is resembling remarkably the same way. And the worrying thing is Korea's aging process even more speedy. And in terms of total working hours, Japan has gone through from hard working population, but number was decreasing around 1990 when the bubble go bust. So something similar is happening, and those are 2 worrying similar signs.
The lost decades in Japan have almost become a cliche now. We say it and we don't necessarily realize all of the conditions that took place in Japan. Give us an overview of what those 2 lost decades have been like in terms of the economy and what Korea, if it doesn't take action, might expect.
Well, Japan was one of the most successful economic story after the Second World War, and around 1990, that was on the verge of overtaking US as number 1 economy. But about the time it is ready to overtake US economy, starting with bust of bubble, housing price in Tokyo, sky was falling down, and so much bad performing loans and so much debt problems. It is creating all sort of lack of consumptions, and demand was falling down. That was beginning. And Japanese government tried to react with some sort of macro policy, conventional macro policy. But they didn't understand what is going on in Japanese economy in terms of demography. There was a rapidly aging society in the world. So somehow these people, old, aging, retired people, they understood what is going on. So instead of spending, they saved and saved more despite interest rates so high. So what really propelled Japan is into long recession, tantamount into last 2 decades is lack of consumption, lack of demand, and policy mistake. And all this combination really gave rise to Japan in those 2 decades. So from that, the lesson we should take is, well, if Korea is going to take footstep of Japan's shadow, this is something very similar because, as I mentioned, Korea demographic change is very similar to Japan, even much fast. So if Korean government try to react with typical macro policy, then they will like to make a mistake. So important thing is they need to create some new engine of economic growth. So far, the economy has been performing on the basis of trade-driven market economy. I tend to believe that days are coming to an end because Korean, how much they could go up in technological ladder is somehow limited. So they need to create new engine of growth. I tend to believe that is a service sector economy. Right now, Korean service sector is so much fragile and so many unproductive. But this is at the same time difficulty, but you can turn around into opportunity. Also, Korean economy and Korean government, they need to take this aging much more seriously because this is taking place in a very short period of time. There's danger that politics are taking all over and making some empty promise which are not going to be sustainable. So in this regard, perhaps government need to create some very important commission or task force, and the longevity goes beyond certain time frame of one administration. So they need to study issues very carefully, comes with some alternative options, weigh very carefully cost and benefit, and then there should be some consensus-based decision making. And once they implement it, that solution must be implemented regardless of who is coming to the powers. And that way alone, possibly Korea is going to avoid falling into some trap of Japanese lost decades.
You've cited the need to develop a new engine of growth, and you said perhaps it's the service sector.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that really parallel similarity between Korea and Japan in the rapidly aging demographics. Fewer working young people to support a larger base of aging people that are exiting the economy. I'd like to dive a little deeper into that right now. You mentioned a task force should be created around that problem.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of possible solutions might that task force come up with to reverse this problem of aging, which usually happens pretty slowly? And you also mentioned the problem of people saving instead of spending and slowing down the economy.
Mm-hmm.
How to address that problem?
I don't think there's any easy fix. Number one, you need to admit this is unavoidable. Aging is unavoidable. And I don't really believe economy like Korea, Korean society, they would embrace very much forward-looking solution like, letting all the people around the world coming to Korea try to find new job in non-performing some sectors. That's not like to happen. Then given that we need to admit the age of high-flying economy is over and we are entering into possibly long winter. That means economy is going to be growing 3 years, 3%, 2%, and you should take it. But the problem is how you can improve your potential. If I can give analogy, consider the case of the fastest guy in the world, Usain Bolt. He's running 9.5 seconds on 100 meters. So improving the potential is let him run 9 seconds and 100 meters. But this is something he can do under the most ideal conditions. Right. Economy is performing, for instance, running 9.3 seconds, 9.4 seconds, depending on external circumstances. But important thing is, Korean economy need to change its conventional modus operandi and change its old habit. And coming to that, I can point out some short-term problem and also a couple of very important long-term problems. But coming into short-term problem, we need to change lack of participation of highly talented women worker forces in the job market. In Korea, there's no difference between boys and girls going to the college all the way, but somehow these highly educated talented women, once they got a job, somehow once they got family, their tendency of not returning to the workplaces because of many issues related, education problem, childcare problem, and so on. And this is a very sad story, even compared to OECD average, but even below when you compare to Japan. So if somehow we could uplift this participation, sort of returning back to works, of these highly talented workforces, women workforces, I think we have strong chance. And second thing is we have to admit these older people, once they retired, but considering longer time in their life, is not likely to spend. So somehow it is impossible to push them to spend even interest rate is very low. That is so-called deflation. So you have to admit deflation is something about to happen. But the question is we need to make it rather less painful and less longer, the pain taking process. So that way, number one, you need to share sort of pain to the people and go to the people unless we're going to change economic structure. This is something not only unavoidable, it will take us all together to a longer time. So that sort of leadership, going to the people and asking, sharing the burden, we need to change economic paradigm from export-driven to service-based economy. When it comes to service economy, you have two different sectors of people working in service sectors, like typical self-employed service providers, crowding all these mom and pop shops and bakery houses and so on. And those are a certain portion of people, and this is red ocean. So we need to turn around this red ocean into some blue ocean. And for that, perhaps you can possibly have ways of importing a lot of wealthy people from China and Japan, come to Korea and spend more. And then this is going to be a very effective win-win formula for the future Korean economy. But that's not going to be easy.
Very fascinating, your remarks about capturing these huge elements of the economy that traditionally have kind of been painted into a corner. You mentioned women. Once motherhood comes around, that tends to become their second career, and they stay in that career in Korea. Sounds like some infrastructure to help them take care of their children and re-enter the workforce might be something this task force could advise. Then the older people who have defaulted into little shops, little chicken restaurants, things like that, if there were a way for them to be productive in the economy. It really is food for thought. A lot of people, when they detect on the consumer level these signs of deflation, will tend to react in that reflexive way that you mentioned earlier in Japan. They will take precautions, they will save, they won't spend their money. How do you get people not to take these reflexive kind of fear-based actions?
Well, that is related to the question of what is going to be new form of so-called Korean welfare society. When you consider Western society, even though the country is going through recessions, but I haven't seen the case that spending has been that much shrunk. It is mainly because they understand whenever they're going through difficulty, some sort of well-designed social welfare system come into play. But Japan's case, somehow they couldn't design that kind of Japanese version of welfare society. So that is important lesson we should take very seriously. But right now in Korea, we all understand they're debating this question, but they didn't really solve the financial side of question. And people tend to believe, some people tend to believe only the big company, rich people should pay those taxes, which could be finance of those welfare society. But when you add them all this together, this is still short of all, the finance necessity. So that means unless we're going to create certain social consensus, some of this social consensus driven is what this task force I mentioned should be developing, and then they have to make all the way.
Let me put you a bit on the spot to predict here. If Korea does enter this deflation-like period, do you have a notion of how long that period may be? And the period that Korea spends in that sort of deflation is contingent on what chief factor, in your opinion?
Well, in the short term, it really depends on how government is going to handling the possible burst of bubble. Whether or not they could make it less painful, so-called make it soft landing, and somehow it is going to be hard landing, then repercussion is going to all over. That is related to so much shouldering of household debt and non-performing loans and banking sectors getting sick and so on. But somehow government is going to successfully manage confining to soft landing, then this long possibility of prolonged deflation may be possibly less painful. But more importantly, as I mentioned, what Japan really failed was they really couldn't understand what is going on in Japanese society. So they simply repeated stop and go expansionary and contractionary macro policy. That was a mistake. Because of that, they couldn't revive Japanese economy toward innovation-driven, more productive economy, and they couldn't fail to change people's psychology mindset. So that led to shortage of demand. So in Korea, we have to take lesson differently. So somehow you have to create social welfare design so the people is going to spend more steadily instead of saving more and more for rainy days. At the same time, you have to create this sort of service big bang, the sort of topic I've been telling to the people, service big bang, and turn around Korean economy with more participation of women, so make economy more productive.
Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Let's hope that South Korea does not repeat Japan's history of deflation. Professor Chae Byung-il, thank you so much for speaking to Bizline today. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much.
What do you do when you want to know more Korean dishes besides popular foods like kimchi, bulgogi, and bibimbap? The app of the week is Korean Menu Guide that allows users to check various Korean dishes. It introduces 154 dishes from Korean restaurants at home and abroad. The Korean dishes are divided by categories and graphic photos to boost the user's appetite. As the app offers information on main ingredients and brief recipes of the dishes, you can see at once what kind of dishes they are. It supports 10 languages, including English, French, Japanese, and Chinese, so most people around the globe can use it.
Think of how long it takes for an acorn to turn into a forest. It takes a few dozen years at least. Sometimes it takes hundreds of years. That's why it is such a loss when any forest is damaged through fire or through any form of human negligence. Well, South Korea is right out in front in terms of using information and communications technologies to protect its forests. Have a look.
Forests account for 64% of the Korean land. The country has the world's fourth largest forest assets. Lately, Korea is introducing the latest information and communications technology to protect its precious forests. In autumn, Korea is covered by colorful foliage. In particular, it's the season when hikers flock to the mountains the most to see the beautiful autumn foliage. With an increase in the number of hikers, small and large accidents happen. Along with this, forest destruction problems also become more serious. But there is a limitation of space for managing staff to go around and check huge mountains one by one.
일반인들이 자주 출입하는 주요 곳에 사람을 거기에 이제 지키게 하는 거는 여러 가지로 비용도 많이 들고 또 여러 가지로 문제가 많이 생길 수가 있어요. 예를 들면 국립공원 지역은 극한 지역이기 때문에 뭐 영하 20도 이런 데에서 사람이 계속 근무하기에는 어렵거든요.
This desolate mountain path is banned from trespassing. A hiker enters a trail banned for trespassing. This raises worries over a possible accident, as well as the risk of wild animals being hunted and forest assets being damaged. Problems are caused by those who climb the mountains through paths forbidden for trespassing. Entering off-limits trails increases the risk of accidents for hikers and also raises forest damage problems. Using its thermal sensors, the surveillance camera detects the hiker.
현재 출입한 향로봉 일대는 멸종위기 야생동식물을 위해 새들 출입이 금지되어 있습니다. 지금 1분 내에 밖으로 나가지 않으시면 단속 직원이 출동할 예정이오니 조속히 나가주시기 바랍니다.
The CCTV camera instantly sends this information to the managing staff's smartphone. Without having to go to the site, the staff can see the relevant video with the smartphone. And at that moment, the staff can immediately make a video call to guide the hiker.
지학상 사무소에서 알려드립니다. 이곳은 길이 아닙니다.
도둑기 나와주시기 바랍니다.
기존에 이제 저희가 설치 전부터 그 무인 센서 카메라를 통해서 그 모니터링을 진행을 했어요. 그리고 설치 전과 후를 비교해 보니까 일단 그 출입자가 10분의 1로 줄었거든요. 10분의 1로 줄었다는 거는 그 안에서 일어날 수 있는 여러 가지 훼손 행위도 줄어들 수 있다는 것을 의미합니다.
This has become possible thanks to the latest Code Division Multiple Access or CDMA technology-based unmanned guidance system. The unmanned guidance system is installed at 19 places, mainly in off-limits trails in the mountains designated as national parks.
현재 설치된 무인 궤도 시스템이 잘 활용되고 있기 때문에 저희가 앞으로 더 확대해가지고 전국 26개 국립공원에 약 50대 정도를 추가로 설치할 예정입니다.
National forests managed by the Korea Forest Service accounts for 24% of the country's total forest area. This is too large for them to manage by themselves, even if they spend every day in forests. To improve such a poor working environment, it has adopted an ICT-based forest system. Without visiting the mountains, they can check from the office the sites where possible forest destruction, like illegal lumbering, is taking place.
항공사진을 연도별로 이제 비교 분석해 보면서 2010년도에는 이렇게 산이 있던 지역에 2012년도 최근 사진에는 이렇게 산림이 불법으로 훼손돼서 나무가 없어졌다거나 지도로 확인한 후에 현장에 가서 GPS 단말기나 이런 것으로 훼손 여부를 확인하게 됩니다.
They can do an on-site inspection when they detect regions suspicious of damaged forest through satellite photos. Using a car that installed a mountain use navigation embedded with a geographic information system, they can find out and visit the exact location.
산림 내비게이션은 이제 일반 그런 그 내비게이션과 다르게 저희가 산 지번에 대한 부분을 정보를 가지고 있습니다. 그래서 그런 산 지번들을 활용해서 쉽게 찾아갈 수 있도록 하는 그런 기능들이 있고요. 그 안에는 이제 산림이 가지고 있는 그런 속성 정보들이 이제 그런 속성 정보의 데이터들이 포함이 되어 있습니다.
Using the mountain navigation, they can arrive exactly at the location which is seen as a suspected forest loss site from the satellite photo. Using GPS-enabled mobile devices, like a smartphone or tablet PC, they can patrol the suspected areas, immediately access forest information, and share data on damaged areas.
우리가 통상 이렇게 현장에 가서 눈으로 확인해서 하는 단속은 매년 한 20-30건 내외인데 올해 같은 경우는 80여 건이 이미 넘어섰습니다. 그래서 아마 연말까지는 100여 건 이상을 우리가 단속을 할 수 있지 않겠나. 이제 이런 부분들이 바로 ICT와 접합한 그런 효과가 아닐까 이렇게 생각을 하고 있습니다.
As forest damage cases and accidents have sharply fallen since the introduction of the ICT system, it is being used widely in the overall forest administration. The convergence of forest administration and ICT is spreading into diverse work areas.
모바일 시스템은 들고 다니면서 현장에서 바로바로 처리가 가능할 수 있기 때문에 이런 기술을 좀 더 섬세하게 또 정교하게 만들어가는 그런 작업이 앞으로도 진행돼야 된다고 봅니다. 현재 저희들은 이제 초기에 이제 처음 이제 시작을 한 단계고 이런 것들이 좀 더 심화되면은 저희들 각 산림 행정 전 분야에 다양하게 이렇게 연결이 돼서 산림 행정을 보다 신속하고 또 대민 서비스도 효율적으로 할 수 있지 않겠나 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
Instead of our eyes and feet, a cutting-edge ICT system that breaks down the limitation of time and space is becoming the guard that protects our precious forest assets.
North Korea is putting a lot of effort into improving its relationship with Russia. Recently, a special envoy headed to Moscow, apparently hand-carrying a personal letter from Kim Jong-un himself. So why Russia, and why now? Well, there's one theory. North Korea is coming under a lot of heat from the United Nations as it investigates North Korea's possible human rights abuses. So North Korea may feel it needs all the friends it can get. There's also the question of how China and North Korea are getting along these days. Is the relationship as close and as cozy as it has always been? Next on Bizline, here in the year 2014, we ask the question, can Russia and North Korea become as close as they once were?
Choi Ryong-hae, the secretary of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of North Korea, on November 24th wrapped up his week-long trip to Russia. The most senior North Korean official to visit Russia since Kim Jong-un succeeded to power in late 2011 delivered a letter from Kim for Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to a report by the Joseon Shinbo, Kim suggested to his Russian counterpart to radically expand bilateral relationship in political, economic, defense, and other areas.
친서에는 일단 기본적으로 북한과 러시아의 전통적 우호 친선 관계를 강조하는 내용이 들어있을 것으로 봅니다. 그러한 강조의 바탕 위에서 최근의 국제 정세 속에서 북한과 러시아의 외교적 협력을 강화하고 양자 관계를 강화하는 그러한 요청을 담은 내용이 있을 것으로 생각됩니다.
Does North Korea have ulterior motives for reaching out to Russia? Experts believe Russia can be helpful in North Korea's diplomatic predicaments.
최근 북한이 이제 북일 관계, 납치자 문제 해결을 통해서 북일 관계 개선에도 나섰지만 사안이 복잡하기 때문에 생각만큼 그렇게 잘 이루어지지 않아요. 또 남북 관계도 사실 박근혜 정부가 원칙적인 입장을 견지하고 있기 때문에 별로 이렇게 돌파구가 마련이 안 되는 상황이죠. 그렇다고 본다 그러면은 북한의 입장에서는 러시아만이 유일한 출구다. 이렇게 볼 수 있는 거죠.
North Korea has decisively turned to Russia after its traditional ally and patron China turned cold.
북한과 중국은 전통 우호 관계이고 또 혈맹 관계였는데 이것이 이제 중국의 개혁 개방 그리고 한중 수교 이후에 그리고 또 북한이 핵 문제로서 국제적 골치 아픈 존재가 되면서 북중 관계는 예전과 같지 않습니다. 이러한 상황 속에서 김정은이라는 새로운 지도자가 등장하고 또 중국에서는 새로운 시진핑이라는 지도자가 등장했는데 이 시진핑과 김정은 체제 하에서 북중 관계는 이제 더 이상 혈맹 관계라는 말을 쓰지 않습니다.
By showing that it has other friends, North Korea also wants to send a message to China, which has been silently obliging with international pressure to use its influence to deter the North's nuclear ambition.
북한으로서는 전통적으로 이미 냉전 시기부터 중국과 러시아 사이의 관계를 이용해서 줄타기 외교를 해왔던 것이 사실입니다. 중국의 북한에 대한 압박이 강화되고 있고 중국이 국제사회의 공조에 동참하고 있는 상황 속에서 김정은으로서는 중국에 대해 대단히 실망을 느꼈을 것이고 또 그러한 반발을 표시하는 일환으로서 러시아와의 관계 강화를 통해서 중국을 압박하고자 하는 그러한 의도가 이번 최룡의 방문에 담겨 있다고 볼 수 있겠습니다.
North Korea and Russia already made big strides in economic partnership. Their joint project includes renovation and modernization of railway and port. They have upsurged exchanges and cooperation in political, military, and cultural fields.
현재 5만 명 이상의 그 북한 노동자들이 러시아의 벌목공과 노동자로 나가고 있고요. 이게 사실은 북한 대북 제재, 국제 제재에 직면한 북한의 굉장히 중요한 현금 수입원이 되고 있어요. 김정은 체제. 그리고 지금 러시아가 생각보다 그 북한의 인프라에 집중적인 투자를 하고 있거나 계획을 하고 있습니다. 특히 이제 중요한 나진항구. 나진항구는 굉장히 중요합니다. 왜냐하면 그 나진항구라고 하는 것이 그 러시아로 이어지는 이 중요한 거점이 되거든요.
Reflecting a rekindled relationship, bilateral trade surged as much as 37.3% last year from the previous year. North Korea is looking for a much-needed economic boost and a counterbalance against Chinese influence from enhanced ties with Russia. But experts believe its relationship in no way can match or replace what it has with China. Despite a recent spike in trade with Russia, its share is paltry compared with China's place in North Korea's external commerce.
If we look at the trade between Russia and North Korea, it's insignificant. North Korean trade with China is roughly 60 times larger than its trade with Russia. Indeed, last year, trade with China was $6.5 billion, and North Korea's trade with Russia was about $120 million. It's likely to increase, but problem is compatibility.
North Korea and Russia are exploring various economic projects, but prospects of their venture remain in question because what they can get out of each other is limited.
North Korea does not produce many items which would be of high quality and in high demand on the international market. So economic compatibility is not high. And I would expect Russia to be involved with developing some mineral resources, some mines, and railway infrastructure. It's possible and it's likely to happen. But if North Koreans hope that they will get it for free, they are going to be disappointed.
Apart from several economic ventures, experts do not believe North Korea's relationship with Russia will be elevated to the level of that with China.
북러 관계는 당분간은 좋아지겠지만 그러나 이 전략적인 중요성에서는 북중 관계를 넘어서기는 어려울 겁니다. 왜냐하면 중국은 아직도 그 북한을 가장 중요한 전략적인 버퍼 존으로 생각을 하고 있어요. 그러니까 다시 말해서 이 미국과 이 중국 간의 어떤 패권 경쟁이 이루어지는 아시아에서 만약에 북한이 없다고 그러면은 그 압록강과 두만강에 주한미군이 배치된 상황이 올 수 있거든요. 또 북한 역시 그 장기간의 어떤 지정학적인 또 역사적인 어떤 그런 경험을 봤을 때 중국만큼 그런 든든한 우방을 확보하기는 어렵거든요.
The relationship between Pyongyang and Moscow has never been as close since the post-Cold War era, but it remains to be seen where the partnership will lead to.
I don't see any alliance coming. I would expect a minor improvement in their political cooperation. I don't expect any significant economic support for North Korea coming from Moscow. Some small-scale investments are possible. Mid-size investment not likely, but not completely impossible. But large-scale aid, forget it.
The two countries have their own motives behind their newfound interest in one another, but a relationship of convenience at times when they are against international pressure cannot be stable or win support from other parts of the world.
And that is Bizline for this week. Next week, we'll be taking a look at these end-of-the-year buying sprees that are taking place all around the world, not just Black Friday in the United States, but places like Korea and elsewhere, especially in the online shopping world. We'll take a look at how Korean industry and Korean consumers are taking advantage of the electronic shopping spree. That's all next week on Bizline. I'm Kurt Asian, coming to you once again from the Ewha University Museum, full of art, textiles, and calligraphy from hundreds of years of Korean history. Definitely make it a point to stop in if you visit Seoul, and we'll see you next Friday.